Daddy, fire all his cronies today. Claire Sullivan spoke that heavy sentence with the freshly stamped divorce decree still warm in her trembling hand, standing on the grand imposing steps of the Suffolk County Courthouse in downtown Boston. 6 years of a seemingly perfect marriage had just been completely dissolved and reduced to 3 thin sheets of legal paper. But James Miller did not have the face of a defeated man. On the contrary, he smiled with a chilling brightness, looking exactly as if the divorce had not taken anything away from him, but rather had finally opened the ultimate golden door he had been waiting for all along. The brisk New England wind whipped around them, carrying the distant sounds of city traffic. But James remained perfectly still, radiating a toxic kind of triumph. He adjusted his expensive wool coat, a coat Claire had purchased for his birthday 2 years prior, and looked down at her with an expression of sheer, unadulterated condescension that made her stomach churn violently. Right by his side stood Megan Reed, his arrogant mistress, wearing an impeccably tailored light-colored dress that defied the autumn chill, and a very expensive designer leather bag casually hung over her slender arm. Claire recognized that specific luxury model, instantly feeling a sharp, familiar sting of humiliation prickling at the back of her tired eyes. Several months ago, that exact same designer bag had mysteriously appeared as a massive, unexplained charge on their joint credit card statement, disguised as a vague corporate expense for a client dinner that had never actually taken place. Megan offered Claire a pitying saccharine smile that did not reach her cold, calculating eyes, clearly enjoying the devastating public spectacle they were making on the courthouse steps. The morning commuters rushed past them, oblivious to the quiet, domestic tragedy unfolding on the historic granite pavement, while Claire simply stood there, gripping her leather purse tightly, trying desperately to maintain whatever small shred of dignity she had left after months of endless, agonizing legal battles. James leaned in just close enough so that only Claire could hear his venomous words over the dull roar of the Boston traffic. "It is finally done, Claire. We are finally right where we belong, each in our proper place," he whispered smoothly, his breath smelling faintly of the expensive peppermint coffee they used to share. Claire did not step back. Instead, she slowly and deliberately tucked the court decree into her bag, right next to her state identification card, the heavy brass keys to her late mother's apartment in Beacon Hill, and a folded receipt from the accounting firm she had been actively avoiding for several agonizing days. Megan let out a low, mocking laugh, leaning against James's arm with an exaggerated sense of ownership. "You have the wealthy family name, the expensive apartment, and the prestigious family business, but you clearly have absolutely no idea how to keep a real man happy." Megan sneered, her voice dripping with venom. Claire swallowed, the heavy, bitter lump in her dry throat, her heart pounding erratically against her ribs, but she absolutely refused to lower her gaze or give them the satisfaction of seeing her cry. It was then that James added, with a terrifying, unnatural calmness that sent a sharp, freezing chill straight down the back of her neck, "Do not try to play the strong, independent woman now, sweetheart. In your father's prestigious real estate company, your father is no longer the one giving the orders. My family is pulling the strings now." That particular statement did not sound like the bitter spite of a scorned ex-husband. It sounded like a meticulously prepared, highly calculated warning of impending doom. The sheer confidence in his dark eyes made the bustling city around her suddenly feel completely silent and suffocatingly small. He was not just taking half of their shared assets. He was implying a total, hostile takeover of the legacy her grandfather had built from scratch. Claire immediately unlocked her mobile phone right there on the busy sidewalk, ignoring the loud noise of the yellow taxis honking and the dense crowds of people aggressively pushing their way out of the busy courthouse doors. With trembling fingers, she frantically logged into the private internal employee directory of Sullivan Real Estate Management, specifically filtering her desperate search for the last names Miller and Reed. To her absolute horror, a massive, endless list of familiar names suddenly flooded her small glowing screen, populating vital departments like front desk reception, corporate payroll, property, purchasing, building maintenance, third-party vendors, and daily incident management. There were far too many names, far too many administrative permissions granted, and entirely too many financial doors left wide open by her own trusting, naive hands over the past half-decade. She felt incredibly foolish, realizing how completely blind she had been. For many consecutive years, Patricia James's seemingly sweet and maternal mother had systematically asked for one tiny, harmless little favor after another, a supposedly hard-working nephew who desperately needed a job, a highly organized sister-in-law who was supposedly fantastic with accounting numbers, a distant cousin who was allegedly a genius at fixing broken window blinds. Every single one of those seemingly innocent requests had arrived beautifully wrapped in the comforting scent of homemade apple pie, warm cups of morning coffee, and deeply emotional manipulative phrases about the supreme importance of family loyalty. Claire immediately dialed her elderly father's private number, her hands shaking so violently she almost dropped the device. Richard answered after 3 long, agonizing rings. "Daddy," she spoke firmly, completely refusing to let a single tear fall from her eyes. "Fire all of his cronies today." Satrit. On the other end of the secure cellular line, there was a profoundly heavy, deeply unsettling silence that stretched on for what felt like an absolute eternity. Finally, her father's voice echoed through the speaker, sounding unimaginably grave, tired and heavy with the immense weight of terrible unspoken secrets. "Come straight home right now, Claire, and under no circumstances should you open any electronic mail forwarded by James," he instructed softly but firmly. Claire slowly pulled the phone away from her ear and stared blankly at the glowing screen. A brand new notification had just popped up in her corporate inbox. The subject line read, "Final pending authorization." Claire did not open the terrifying message. Instead, she powered down the screen, completely shoved the phone deep into her bag, and walked purposefully toward the busy taxi stand, clutching the divorce decree tightly against her chest, while the chaotic city of Boston continued to spin wildly around her. The yellow taxi aggressively navigated the narrow, familiar cobblestone streets, lined with antique doorways, narrow wrought-iron balconies, and slightly crooked wooden shutters, faded by the harsh coastal sun. Sitting quietly in the worn leather back seat, Claire vividly remembered the very first time she had ever brought James to this historic neighborhood. Back then, he possessed absolutely no private corner office and possessed absolutely no stable, wealthy clients of his own. He was merely working for cheap hourly wages for a struggling, aggressive attorney in Cambridge, spending endless nights thoroughly reviewing tedious labor contracts and incredibly small, insignificant legal claims. He had arrived at her family home carrying a terribly cheap bottle of red wine purchased from a local discount supermarket, acting incredibly nervous, aggressively polite, and respectfully calling her father Mr. Sullivan, even though Richard had warmly and repeatedly asked the young man to address him by his first name. Claire had deeply and foolishly fallen in love with that carefully constructed illusion of profound modesty, or at least what she desperately wanted to believe was genuine modesty. Shortly after their beautiful wedding, his mother, Patricia, formally entered the picture. At the very beginning, she would randomly appear on lazy Sunday afternoons, carrying a freshly baked apple pie that was still wonderfully warm to the touch, constantly asking about Richard's declining health, and loudly proclaiming to anyone who would listen that Claire was the precious daughter she had never been blessed with. Patricia possessed an incredibly soft, deeply manipulative way of asking for monumental favors. She absolutely never demanded anything. Outright, she merely let a heavy, sorrowful tragedy fall right in the middle of drinking her afternoon tea. "My poor nephew is currently unemployed, the poor sweet thing. Could he perhaps just help out at the front desk? Just for a little while. He is a very nice boy." That supposedly nice nephew was merely the first subtle infiltration into the family empire. Soon after, a highly organized sister-in-law mysteriously arrived to supposedly assist the overwhelmed corporate accounting department, followed rapidly by a distant cousin who supposedly knew how to expertly repair broken window blinds, and then a random neighborhood acquaintance specifically hired to thoroughly clean the various luxury tourist apartments scattered across the city. Every single favor seemed incredibly small, almost fundamentally human, and entirely understandable. Outright refusing any of these seemingly desperate pleas would have sounded exceptionally cruel and heartless. However, Richard, with his decades of ruthless business experience, saw right through the elaborate charade. One rainy afternoon inside his private home office, he had told her, without ever raising his commanding voice, "It is one thing to help people, Claire. It is an entirely different thing to leave the main cash register completely wide open for them." Claire had become incredibly angry at her father's suspicious words. She angrily replied that not absolutely everyone had been luckily born with a prestigious family name, a massive corporate empire, and a fully paid luxury apartment in the best part of the city. She passionately argued that James desperately needed to feel professionally respected, that her new husband's struggling family was absolutely not a dangerous threat, but rather just a group of honest, hard-working people desperately searching for a golden opportunity. Now, as she slowly inserted the heavy brass key into the antique wooden door of the Beacon Hill apartment building, those past arguments burned her deeply, hurting far more than any direct reprimand ever could. The incredibly old, terrifyingly slow elevator took an absolute eternity to descend to the lobby. The tiny metal cabin smelled strongly of cheap lemon floor cleaner and massive stacks of forgotten accumulated mail. Inside her personal brass mailbox, wedged tightly between glossy advertisements for a local cosmetic dentist and mundane community utility bills, she surprisingly found a thick, heavy envelope explicitly marked from the family's independent accounting firm. She nervously shoved it into her leather purse, without daring to open it quickly, unlocking the door and stepping into the silent, freezing apartment. Her late mother's beautiful, handcrafted wooden dining table still sat faithfully next to the bright kitchen window. Resting silently on top of the polished wood was a perfectly clean porcelain coffee mug, placed completely upside down, looking exactly as if someone was patiently waiting for their early morning coffee to be poured. Claire gently placed the heavy divorce papers right next to the empty mug and took a very long, deep, shaky breath, trying desperately to calm her racing, terrified heart. She purposefully did not stay inside the haunted apartment for very long. She quickly opened a lower desk drawer, aggressively pulling out a thick manila folder filled to the brim with incredibly old, outdated employment contracts, faded copies of early payroll slips, and heavily printed email correspondence dating all the way back to the very first years of her marriage. Armed with this historical ammunition, she marched back downstairs, hailed another taxi, and instructed the driver to take her directly to the family's incredibly exclusive boutique hotel, located right in the heart of the bustling Back Bay district. She desperately needed to verify one specific crucial date. Just one single piece of information to confirm her worst, darkest suspicions. As she quietly descended into the humid, loud basement level, standing right next to the massive industrial laundry machines, she suddenly heard her name whispered. "Miss Claire," the voice called out softly. It was Mary, the deeply loyal, hard-working head floor maid, who had dedicated 18 long years of her life dutifully working for the Sullivan family. The older woman possessed hands that were completely reddened and thoroughly cracked from years of harsh cleaning chemicals, and her tired eyes darted around nervously. She carefully looked up toward the main staircase before quickly pulling a severely worn, remarkably old blue spiral notebook straight out of her faded cloth tote bag. "This precious thing should absolutely never be thrown away," Mary whispered urgently, her voice trembling slightly. "Right inside here is the undeniable truth of who actually worked inside this building." Claire carefully took the worn blue notebook, using both of her trembling hands, feeling as if the small, fragile object weighed significantly more than an entire filing cabinet full of corporate documents. Mary absolutely did not add another word. She merely wiped her cracked, chemical-stained hands aggressively on her white cotton apron, quickly lowered her gaze, and practically ran back toward the loud, steaming industrial laundry room the exact second she heard heavy footsteps echoing on the wooden staircase above them. That incredibly small, profoundly terrified gesture silently told Claire that the battered blue notebook in her hands absolutely did not contain a simple, innocent list of daily employee shifts. She quietly walked up the back stairs to the small hidden administrative office of the luxury hotel, the specific room that directly overlooked the quiet interior courtyard, where the staff frequently hung massive white cotton sheets to dry whenever the weather was pleasant. She firmly closed the heavy wooden door behind her, locking it with a satisfying click, and dropped the thick manila folder onto the dusty desk. She slowly opened the worn blue notebook right to the very first crinkled page. The fragile paper smelled strongly of dark, damp basements, harsh industrial bleach, and cheap leaking ballpoint pens. The pages were meticulously filled with real names carefully written in incredibly firm, deliberate handwriting, recording precise morning entry times, specific room assignments, unexpected boiler malfunctions, urgent light bulb replacements, demanding customer requests, and authentic, ink-stained signatures firmly stamped at the very end of every single grueling workday. At first, Claire completely failed to understand what crucial piece of evidence she was desperately searching for. Then, suddenly, the very first massive discrepancy practically jumped off the page and slapped her across the face. Mary, the terrified maid, was clearly listed in the blue notebook, working 3 consecutive Sundays straight, clocking in precisely at 8 in the morning and leaving exhausted at 6 in the evening. However, on the officially printed corporate payroll document that Claire had just retrieved from the Beacon Hill apartment, Mary was shockingly registered as only working a simple part-time schedule. The next devastating revelation was Emily, the deeply dedicated night receptionist. Inside the worn blue notebook, Emily had successfully completed 4 absolute grueling overnight shifts. Yet, inside the official digital internal accounting system, she was only financially credited for 2. Claire aggressively flipped through the fragile pages significantly faster, her heart hammering against her ribs. Every single handwritten line seemed to aggressively rip up another floorboard of the carefully constructed lies surrounding her. Conversely, the specific name of Ryan Miller, the supposedly hard-working nephew of the manipulative Patricia, was proudly listed on the official corporate roster of highly paid reception employees, but his name absolutely never appeared inside the blue notebook. Ryan had not signed in a single time. There was absolutely no signature, no recorded guest incident, and not a single handwritten note ever produced by him. The exact same terrifying situation occurred with Brittany, the supposedly highly organized sister-in-law who allegedly assisted the overwhelmed accounting department. She consistently received a massive, highly lucrative financial bonus for constant administrative availability, but absolutely nobody in the entire building had ever recorded her physically stepping foot inside the luxury hotel for many consecutive months. Claire rapidly flipped open the small, dusty laptop sitting abandoned on the corner of the wooden desk. It was definitely not James's highly secured personal computer, but rather the old forgotten auxiliary terminal belonging strictly to the hotel, technically still registered under the master name of General Corporate Administration. Because it had been completely ignored for months, Claire was still legally listed as a managing partner. Her highly secure digital administrative access certificate had remarkably never been formally revoked by the IT department. The incredibly old complex password miraculously still functioned perfectly because absolutely nobody in James's arrogant family had ever imagined that the heartbroken, supposedly defeated Claire would ever dare to look inside the system from this forgotten basement terminal. She quickly accessed the master payroll software, aggressively downloading the financial records for the last 6 months, and instantly began conducting a side-by-side comparison. The chaotic mechanical noise of the industrial laundry room violently vibrated through the floorboards beneath her feet. Massive washing machines spinning aggressively, heavy plastic buckets being loudly dragged across concrete, and a cheap radio quietly broadcasting a mundane midday talk show. The surrounding environment was incredibly normal, almost painfully ordinary, and for that exact reason, the massive betrayal hurt significantly more. The systematic financial theft was absolutely not cleverly hidden inside massive, brilliant, highly complicated corporate contracts. It was disgustingly buried deep inside poorly compensated hourly wages, entirely erased Sunday shifts, and fake names belonging to lazy relatives who happily collected massive paychecks without ever breaking a single drop of sweat. At exactly 20 minutes past 3 in the afternoon, Claire quietly descended into the dusty, cluttered maintenance utility room. Hidden deep inside a battered cardboard box, she shockingly discovered hundreds of fake repair work orders aggressively stapled directly to severely inflated invoices. Replacing a simple broken motor for a standard window blind on the second floor was billed at an outrageous $980. A remarkably quick internet search on her mobile phone instantly revealed that the standard average price for that specific repair rarely ever reached $200. An allegedly urgent mandatory safety inspection of the antique elevator system was billed at a staggering $4,700. The deeply suspicious invoice originated from a mysterious company named Miller Integral Services, a completely unknown corporate entity legally registered to a terrible run-down residential address in Dorchester, heavily tied to Patricia's own brother-in-law. Claire did not scream, cry, or throw things. Instead, she methodically used her mobile phone to capture perfectly clear photographs, capturing absolutely every single page and every single fraudulent invoice. She then systematically forwarded absolutely all the explosive evidence directly to her highly secure, heavily encrypted personal email address using a remarkably neutral, incredibly boring subject line, Hotel Documentation. Before quietly shutting the old laptop down, she meticulously checked the digital trash bin of the corporate email server. There were highly sensitive messages permanently deleted just 2 days ago. One incredibly specific, highly damaging email, aggressively sent by James directly to Megan, was miraculously still fully recoverable. Claire slowly clicked the digital button with her heart sitting completely still inside her chest, opening the file the exact same way a terrified person opens a medical envelope when they already know the agonizing truth hiding inside. The message read, "As long as Claire remains thoroughly distracted and emotionally destroyed by the messy divorce proceedings, we will aggressively lock down absolutely everything before Richard ever decides to look closely at the corporate accounts again." For several agonizing seconds, Claire completely forgot how to breathe. That single terrifying sentence absolutely did not speak of spontaneous, desperate improvisation. It spoke of a meticulously planned, highly organized criminal conspiracy, with a strict calendar, immense urgency, and someone constantly monitoring her every single desperate move. Buried slightly below that horrifying text, almost completely lost between two broken paragraphs, was another incredibly terrifying sentence. The lucrative sale of the Beacon Hill apartment absolutely cannot wait any longer. Claire finally arrived at the massive, heavily guarded gates of the luxurious Brookline estate, carrying the worn blue notebook securely hidden deep inside her leather bag, alongside an explosive stack of freshly printed fake invoices. She had absolutely not called ahead. She had merely sent her elderly father a remarkably short, incredibly urgent text message. "I am coming straight home right now. The situation is significantly worse than we ever initially thought." Richard was patiently waiting for her inside the grand, dimly lit study, sitting quietly right next to the massive bay window overlooking the perfectly manicured, sprawling back garden. His heavy wooden walking cane rested against the coffee table. A massive, remarkably thick gray folder sat completely open right next to his resting hand. He absolutely did not ask her if she was feeling okay. Sometimes the rare people who genuinely and deeply love you completely understand that asking such a mundane question only serves to completely break whatever fragile strength you have left. "Show me absolutely everything," Claire demanded softly but firmly. She carefully placed the worn blue notebook detailing the real employee shifts. The freshly printed fraudulent payroll documents, the clear digital photographs of the heavily inflated Dorchester invoices, and the horrifying recovered email message sent by James directly onto the polished mahogany table. Richard slowly put on his reading glasses, reading absolutely every single word incredibly slowly. His weathered face completely changed color several times, yet he absolutely never raised his calm, authoritative voice once. When he finally reached the terrifying sentence regarding the impending illegal sale of the Beacon Hill apartment, he tightly closed his tired eyes for one agonizing second. "I warned you once, before," he murmured quietly into the silent room. "Those requests were absolutely not innocent family favors. They were a calculated, aggressive invasion." Claire absolutely did not try to defend herself. She no longer possessed the emotional strength to falsely protect her shattered pride. She quickly ripped open the heavy envelope from the independent accounting firm that she had blindly grabbed from her mailbox earlier. Inside, she discovered a terrifying bright red warning notice explicitly detailing massive payment discrepancies. The total corporate personnel costs had violently skyrocketed by 38% in just 2 short years. The daily maintenance incidents and repair bills had magically tripled without any logical explanation. 3 supposedly brand-new highly paid corporate vendors miraculously shared the exact same residential billing address as Patricia's immediate family members. Richard slowly pushed his incredibly thick gray folder directly across the mahogany table toward her trembling hands. Tucked safely inside were his own meticulously gathered personal notes, suspicious community association receipts, massive bank transfers to unknown individuals that he absolutely did not recognize, highly suspicious duplicate repair budgets, and a single handwritten note scrawled on yellow paper. It explicitly read, "Absolutely do not take any legal action without securing undeniable labor proof first." I absolutely did not want to aggressively fight with my only daughter over mere corporate rumors, Richard explained softly. I desperately needed you to witness the devastating truth with your own 2 eyes. Claire felt an overwhelming wave of deep, burning shame, but also something wonderfully new. She felt a powerful, incredibly clean sensation that was significantly stronger than pure, blind rage. She meticulously organized the scattered papers strictly by chronological date, pulled a fresh, clean notepad from her leather bag, and immediately began aggressively writing down every single name involved. She absolutely no longer spoke like a shattered, freshly divorced woman. She spoke with the commanding authority of someone who had just finally realized exactly who started the massive fire, burning her house down. At exactly 5 o'clock in the afternoon, they placed an urgent call to Laura, their incredibly ruthless, highly trusted corporate attorney, and Julian, the brilliant, fiercely loyal financial accountant who had proudly worked for the Sullivan family for over 20 incredible years. They both arrived exactly 1 hour later. Still wearing her heavy wool winter coat, Laura immediately demanded black coffee. Julian slowly placed an incredibly old, highly reliable calculator and a heavily secured laptop covered in federal tax stickers directly onto the polished mahogany table. The very first legal warning from the attorney was crystal clear. They absolutely could not legally fire everyone simultaneously in a massive emotional fit of rage. If they executed the terminations incorrectly, the Miller family could aggressively sue the company for massive wrongful termination payouts and successfully present themselves to the media as innocent victims of a wealthy, deeply vindictive family. Then we will execute this flawlessly, Claire stated with absolute, unwavering conviction. During the next 2 grueling hours, Claire systematically signed significantly more legal documents than she had during the entire morning of her divorce proceedings. Laura meticulously drafted certified legal suspension letters for every single employee who absolutely lacked legitimate proof of work. Julian aggressively locked down the master corporate payroll software straight from his highly secured accounting terminal, completely blocking all outside access. Claire personally called the regional director of the State Street Bank and firmly demanded an immediate total suspension of all programmed corporate transfers heading to the 3 highly suspicious vendor companies until a thorough, aggressive legal review was completed. She also strictly ordered the absolute cancellation of every single corporate credit card directly linked to James Meghan and 2 specific highly active family members related to Patricia. Then came the significantly more delicate, highly technical part of their aggressive counterattack. A brilliant, highly specialized forensic computer expert, explicitly recommended by Laura, immediately logged into the main corporate server remotely to create heavily encrypted, legally certified backup copies of every single email access log and recently modified digital invoice. Claire intently watched the glowing computer screen without ever looking away. Every single loading bar progressing across the screen felt exactly like a heavy iron door slamming securely shut, permanently locking the thieves out right before anyone could aggressively destroy the damning evidence. At exactly 40 minutes past 8 in the evening, the desperate phone calls finally began. First it was James calling repeatedly, then Meghan trying her luck. Soon after, incredibly bizarre, completely unknown numbers flooded the screen. Claire simply let the phone ring endlessly into the silent room. Short, increasingly desperate text messages started rapidly appearing on the glowing glass. "What exactly are you doing? Claire, answer the phone right now. This absolutely will not end well for you. At exactly 17 minutes past 9, the incredibly loud security buzzer of the massive iron estate gate violently rang out. Displayed clearly on the glowing screen of the security intercom was Patricia standing completely soaked by the freezing Boston rain, with her wet hair plastered flat against her wrinkled forehead, desperately clutching a cheap plastic container of homemade apple pie tightly between her trembling hands. Richard absolutely did not order the security guards to open the massive iron gate. He slowly looked at the glowing intercom screen, then carefully turned his tired eyes toward Claire, silently waiting for his daughter to make the final decision. That profoundly heavy, silent pause made her finally understand something incredibly important. She was absolutely no longer the fragile, naive daughter who desperately needed to be shielded from the brutal blows of reality. She was now the absolute leader who had to aggressively absorb the impact and fight back. "Let her inside," Claire commanded softly. "But Laura absolutely must stay right here," Claire added firmly. The sharp corporate attorney calmly placed her black coffee down on the table and immediately activated the digital voice recorder on her mobile phone, placing it face down on the mahogany wood. Julian quickly shut his secured laptop and aggressively gathered the highly sensitive financial papers into his briefcase. A deeply strange, incredibly heavy silence quickly fell over the massive house, broken only by the aggressive sound of the freezing rain violently hitting the thick glass windows. Patricia finally appeared in the grand study, still wearing her completely soaked winter coat, and desperately clutching the pathetic plastic container between her trembling hands. The homemade pie looked incredibly absurd, almost entirely obscene, sitting right next to the massive stack of certified legal suspensions and blatantly forged maintenance invoices. Her expensive mascara was running terribly down her pale cheeks, but her calculating eyes were absolutely still running the numbers. "Claire, my sweet daughter," Patricia began, her voice dripping with fake emotion. "There was absolutely no need to take things this far." Claire completely ignored the incredibly manipulative word, daughter. She simply pointed directly at an empty wooden chair. "Please sit down, Patricia." The incredibly cold, highly formal greeting completely derailed the older woman. Patricia slowly placed the plastic container down onto the low coffee table, looking exactly as if she believed she could still magically purchase a few extra minutes of blind trust with baked goods. She then turned her desperate gaze toward Richard. "Richard, please listen to reason. We are family. The poor children are completely terrified. They absolutely cannot access the corporate email system. The corporate credit cards are completely declining everywhere, and tomorrow is the absolute deadline to finalize the monthly payroll." Patricia pleaded desperately. "We are absolutely no longer family," Claire stated with ice in her veins. "And only the legitimate, authentic payroll will be strictly honored." Patricia swallowed incredibly hard, her throat visibly bobbing for the very first time. She absolutely had not braved the freezing rain to casually ask for another small favor for a distant relative. She had come here begging for emergency oxygen to save their rapidly sinking criminal ship. Just please reactivate everything strictly until the end of the month. Reactivate the accounts just until the end of the month, and then we can all sit down and calmly discuss this situation like reasonable adults. James is incredibly nervous. Megan is terrified. You have absolutely no idea. You have no idea the massive amount of damage an emotional, hot-headed decision can cause." Patricia threatened weakly. Claire firmly pressed both of her hands down against her knees, just to stop herself from violently clenching her trembling fists. "What exactly happens at the end of the month?" Claire demanded sharply. Patricia nervously licked her dry, trembling lips, glancing sideways at Laura, the attorney, and then quickly at Julian, the accountant. She had clearly arrived expecting to easily manipulate a deeply hurt, emotionally shattered ex-daughter-in-law, absolutely not a fortified war room filled with a ruthless attorney, a brilliant accountant, and a furious patriarch. There are highly complex, strictly confidential cross-payments happening behind the scenes, Claire complicated corporate matters. You simply do not understand the massive amount of money constantly moving around behind the curtains. Laura barely raised a single, skeptical eyebrow. Then please explicitly explain it to us, Laura challenged smoothly. Patricia immediately lowered her trembling voice to a pathetic whisper. If you aggressively cut those vendor contracts tomorrow, the independent accounting firm will instantly realize that several highly paid employees have absolutely never stepped foot inside the luxury hotel. And if that terrible information leaks out, the bank can aggressively demand absolute repayment of everything all at once. Claire suddenly felt the massive walls of the grand study rapidly closing in around her. What bank are you talking about? Patricia instantly realized she had spoken significantly too much, but it was already too late. A simple corporate loan, absolutely nothing strange, exactly $620,000. James desperately needed the massive capital to officially launch his own private venture. The steady income from the maintenance and cleaning shell companies served as the required financial collateral. We just desperately needed 3 more months, Claire. We strictly needed 3 little months. Patricia begged. Richard tightly closed his tired eyes, looking exactly like a man listening to something deeply fractured, finally shattering into a million tiny pieces. And exactly what happens after those 3 months? Claire asked, with terrifying calmness. Patricia stared blankly at the plastic container, her wrinkled hand violently trembling directly over the cheap plastic lid. After those 3 months, James was going to rapidly sell the Beacon Hill apartment, completely liquidate the massive bank loan, and then absolutely everyone could simply walk away quietly without any massive public scandal. The beloved name of her late mother's beautiful apartment suddenly stopped being a mere sentence buried inside a deleted email and instantly transformed into a massive, highly concrete, terrifyingly real threat. Claire felt an overwhelming wave of emotion. She felt much more than she remembered the absolute warmth of her mother's kitchen, the clean coffee mug resting upside down the beautifully folded tablecloth safely tucked inside the wooden drawer. That specific apartment strictly belongs to me, Claire stated firmly. It legally belonged to my late mother. Patricia's face instantly turned completely white, completely drained of all blood. James already possessed the fully executed legal authorization required to officially initiate the property sale. Claire absolutely did not move a single muscle. I absolutely never signed any document authorizing that sale. Laura, the ruthless attorney, was already standing up. She immediately ordered Julian to access the highly secured digital archives of the independent accounting firm and aggressively searched the database for several tense minutes. When Julian finally located the highly encrypted document, he immediately sent it to the heavy office printer. It was absolutely not a finalized, legally binding property deed, but rather a highly detailed forged private authorization specifically prepared to be officially presented at the notary office, magically elevating it to a binding power of attorney the exact second Claire supposedly ratified the signature. The heavy machinery of the printer sounded incredibly loud and violent inside the dead silence of the grand house. Printed clearly on the very last page of the document was a signature, the name of Claire Sullivan perfectly slanted, looking almost incredibly perfect. Almost. Claire stared intently at the printed paper without ever physically touching it. There was one incredibly small, fatal detail missing a highly specific, unique curve strictly in the letter L that was only ever executed by someone who had spent years carefully watching her sign community checks, utility receipts, and holiday greeting cards. Claire calmly confronted her manipulative former mother-in-law, Patricia, after exposing a forged authorization bearing Claire's fake signature. Instead of arguing, she had the document secured as evidence and escorted Patricia out with dignity. The next morning, James launched a public smear campaign falsely portraying Claire as mentally unstable and accusing her of threatening the company out of revenge. Rather than responding emotionally, Claire and her attorney Laura quietly initiated a lawful financial and labor audit, encouraging honest employees to submit evidence directly to an independent legal office. One after another, workers came forward with payroll records, security footage, fraudulent invoices, overtime violations, and other proof exposing years of corruption, while a forensic handwriting expert officially confirmed that the signature on the authorization had been skillfully forged. As more evidence emerged, including security footage showing Megan disguised while assisting James during the attempted property transaction, Laura learned that James planned to finalize the illegal sale of Claire's late mother's apartment the following morning. Claire spent a sleepless night preparing herself, then arrived with Laura Richard, the handwriting expert, and the chief notary after James had already presented the forged documents to the buyer. At the critical moment, the chief notary immediately suspended the transaction because of credible evidence of document fraud. James desperately claimed Claire was unstable, but she calmly presented her mother's inheritance deed and the official police report proving she had never authorized the sale. The buyer immediately withdrew from the deal. Megan was confronted with the incriminating security evidence, and Patricia watched in horror as two police officers entered the room to investigate the attempted fraud. Without shouting or seeking revenge, Claire defended her legal rights with confidence, professionalism, and undeniable evidence. Through patience, truth, and respect for the law, she reclaimed not only her inheritance, but also her peace of mind, realizing that true victory is never achieved through anger or retaliation, but by protecting one's dignity, setting firm boundaries, and refusing to let others define one's worth.